This is Christopher John Bjerknes. It is September 22nd, 2025. I'm going to be explaining the subliminal messaging that is being interpreted by Christians in the statements of Erica Kirk and the spectacle of the so-called memorial for Charlie Kirk following his assassination. I'm going to be covering two main aspects of that subliminal messaging which is being received by the Christian public. On the one hand, the call for forgiveness of Tyler Robinson, the call not to execute Tyler Robinson, sends the signal to the public, conditioning the public to accept a plea deal from the state of Utah to Tyler Robinson, an agreement between those two parties that Tyler Robinson will not be put to death if he pleads guilty to the crime and instead will be punished with life imprisonment, perhaps several consecutive life terms in prison without the chance of parole. That would accomplish many things. It would prevent a public trial, a drawn-out public trial, in which there would be ongoing, prolonged discussions of what actually happened and who was actually ultimately responsible for what happened. We already see that the Jews in Israel are being blamed, sometimes without any shred of evidence whatsoever. So they definitely want to put an end to that. It would also prevent the state from being forced to prove its theory of the crime. There would be no more further investigations of who the shooter was and what the shooter did. There would be no exhumation of Charlie Kirk's body in order to recover evidence, perhaps exculpatory evidence for the defense, including the angle of impact, bullet fragments, etc., 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 which could potentially exonerate Tyler Robinson and would also be a public humiliation for the state of Utah. There would be no challenges to any of the investigations, and very importantly, there would be no prolonged trial with continuous social media chatter about who is ultimately responsible for this. So I think one of the things being accomplished by this spectacle is that it is conditioning the public to accept the ultimate fate of this trial being in the hands of the state of Utah and enabling the prosecutors to arrive at a plea deal with Charlie Kirk and have the Christian public, the Mormon public of Utah and Christian public across America and around the world be forgiving of that decision and in agreement with that decision and believing that God's plan had been served and that justice had been served and that Christians are not obligated to engage in punishments of an eye for an eye and put Tyler Robinson to death. Of course, the state under such a scenario would first be obliged to seek the death penalty in order to leverage and pressure Tyler Robinson with fear for his life into accepting a plea deal, whether or not he is guilty. That puts tremendous burden on the accused, tremendous psychological pressure on the accused to accept a plea deal, which would prevent an eventual trial and the full public discourse on that trial day to day, as happened with the OJ trial. In other words, it would effectively shut everyone up, and it would take all the wind out of the sails of those who are blaming the Jews and Israel for this crime. In other words, it would be damage control. They would be engaging in damage control to prevent the prolonged trial that would ultimately result in an ongoing, continuous discussion of all the facts of the case and would enable bad actors to continually scapegoat people without evidence, to fabricate hoax evidence, etc., etc. In other words, it would enable them to effectively shut it all down. The other messaging that is being sent to Christians is that this was all part of a divine plan, and that if the Jews were behind it, they should be forgiven for it because they are God's chosen people. This is getting rid of his blood be upon us and upon our children, because Charlie Kirk is being portrayed as Jesus Christ. Tyler Robinson, the accused alleged shooter, is being portrayed as Judas, who is fulfilling the divine plan by killing Jesus Christ, by killing Charlie Kirk, allegedly. Donald Trump is playing the role of John the Evangelist, the disciple whom Jesus loved, and is comforting Mary. Mary is portrayed by Erica Trump, mourning the death of Jesus, mourning the death of Charlie Kirk. So those two aspects are very much in play in this massive spectacle which is being staged before our eyes. And there is a lot of biblical verses which relate to all this that I'm going to explain to my paid subscribers at CJBbooks.substack.com. I'm going to demonstrate how a narrative is being conducted that there should be forgiveness of Tyler Robinson in order to forgive the Jews, for they know not what they do. In other words, forgive the Jews because they know exactly what they're doing, because they are the divine people fulfilling the divine plan. And it was God's plan, according to Erica Kirk, that Charlie Kirk should be killed, which is why he opted not to wear his bulletproof vest on the day of the assassination. She takes that as if it were proof of a divine plan. And if the Jews were behind that plan, then they were agents of the divine will and should be forgiven. She doesn't discuss the free will to sin and that a sinner should be punished. Instead, she relies upon the biblical verses that Jesus said to abandon the idea of an eye for an eye, a death for a death, and forgive those who trespass against you, as Elon Musk highlighted. And also, this spectacle is setting up to condition the public to accept a plea deal, which will silence all of this, which will prevent the exhumation of Charlie Kirk's body after what appears to be a very rushed autopsy, atypical in the fact that Charlie was put in a coffin and shipped off to Phoenix the day after he was shot. The body was not held for a prolonged period at all. And there are many questions about the angle of the shot. Was what portion of the bullet was recovered? Was it a substantial enough portion of the bullet to be recovered that would be able to identify it with the rifling profile of the alleged shooting weapon, etc.? I may also get into all that for my paid subscribers. Again, I want to cover how there was initially a need to pursue the death penalty in order to pressure Tyler Robinson to accept a plea deal in anticipation of a plea deal. And then the public has to be conditioned to accept a plea deal as well. And that is done by by manipulating the public with Christian theology, encouraging them to engage in forgiveness and not seek the death penalty, although Christians throughout Christian history have indeed imposed the death penalty over and over again. I'm going to talk about the blasphemous aspects of whether or not a person can engage in forgiveness when only God can forgive sins. So if you want to see all of that, please do head on over to CJBbooks.substack.com. Get yourself a paid subscription so that you can see all the things that I'm going to be covering and discussing and analyzing with my unique perspective on all of this. And you will also be able to see all of my previous and forthcoming full presentations on these and related subjects. I'll give you a brief overview of what I'm going to be hitting upon so that you can make a decision about whether you want to see all of that or not. I have been posting yesterday and in the comments been receiving tens of thousands of views on my theory that by promoting the call for forgiveness and saying that this is part of a divine plan, that this is setting up for a plea deal. And I'm going to quote Charlie Kirk's wife. I'm going to play what she said and go over it and analyze it all in the light of Scripture and how this is evoking images and subliminal messages to Christians around the world. I'm going to talk about how Utah law allows for such a plea deal to reduce the sentence from death to, say, perhaps multiple life terms without the chance of parole, which would be something the Christian public may now embrace, since Erica Kirk, who is the person most entitled to give her input as to what she thinks is a just sentence, has now said that she does not want to see the death penalty imposed because she does not want that on her ledger when she enters into heaven. A Christian hearing that will think, oh my goodness, if I want to see Charlie Kirk die, I'm going to go to hell because Jesus is going to judge me for seeking death for the death, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. So I had better shut up and not speak out against any plea deal. Instead, I should agree to and promote that a plea deal be entered into and agreed to, and that this man not be put to death. And I'm going to talk about free will and divine will and how Christians have been set up by the Jews for these very dilemmas which are being presented to them, that this is part of an ancient plan to dupe, delude, and set up Christians. And I'm going to go over how so many major social media accounts are parroting an exact narrative of what I just described, as if they were all issued a memo on how to comment on this and to be certain to comment on this. And this is becoming an increasingly common occurrence in social media, that they create the illusion that there is a consensus opinion upon this between Jews and Gentiles of exactly what the narrative is, and how all of these influencers who are algorithmically boosted and who are promoted in mainstream media and alt media all issue the same narrative at the same time. This is a form of psychological warfare. So again, be sure and get yourself a paid subscription to CJBbooks.substack.com. I'm now going to head over to my paid Substack viewers. I thank you for watching until now. I want to thank my contributors who have contributed through my PayPal, Buy Me a Coffee, and cryptocurrencies. Thank you all so much. If you would like to contribute, please do so. I do need your contributions to pay my rent and buy food for myself as I present these unique insights to all the world. Thank you all so much.